How a slap turned into a powerful lesson in restraint. Welcome to our channel. We're so excited to have you here today. Before we dive into today's incredible story, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Whether it's across the street or across the world, we want to know. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next amazing chapter we'll be sharing with you tomorrow. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more stories that will leave you thinking long after the video ends. At 10:40 a.m., Buckingham Palace was buzzing with energy. The Grand Square was filled with tourists from all walks of life, their phones raised high, capturing the essence of British history in every shot. Laughter echoed, mixed with the excited chatter of guides explaining the royal traditions that had stood the test of time. The iconic Queen's Guard, Ethan Carter, stood motionless at his post, his eyes scanning the surroundings beneath the tall, stiff brim of his red and black uniform. For 6 years, he had been part of this ceremonial detail, guarding not just the palace but the legacy it represented. Ethan's service wasn't just rooted in tradition. Before his ceremonial role, he had served 2 tours in Helmand Province, where the battlefield had shaped him into a man who understood that real strength wasn't always in loud actions. It was in the quiet resolve, the stillness in the face of danger, and the discipline that kept him grounded in the hardest of circumstances. The calm atmosphere of the palace courtyard was suddenly interrupted when a luxury car pulled up to the entrance. Out stepped Ryan Sinclair, 22, dressed in an expensive designer suit and a $1,000 watch that gleamed in the sunlight. His attitude was as polished as his attire, confident, arrogant, and laced with entitlement. Ryan was the son of Edward Sinclair, a billionaire CEO and former war sponsor, and he strode up to Ethan with a smirk plastered across his face. "Let's see what these toys do if you poke them," Ryan said, his friends laughing behind him. His tone was mocking, filled with an air of superiority. He stepped directly in front of Ethan, who stood tall, unmoving, unwavering in his discipline. "Do." "You blink, statue boy," Ryan taunted, the words dripping with condescension. He wasn't satisfied with the mockery. He wanted a reaction. Ethan remained as still as stone, not a flicker in his gaze, not a twitch of his fingers. His uniform, pristine and perfect, seemed to blend him with the very architecture around him, but his discipline and focus were a stark contrast to the casual attitude of the young man before him. Without warning, Ryan's hand shot out, slapping Ethan's face. The blow wasn't hard, but it was loud, sharp, disrespectful, and designed to provoke. Gasps exploded from the crowd as the sound of the slap echoed across the courtyard. Phones were quickly raised, capturing the moment for social media. Ethan remained motionless, despite the blood trickling from the corner of his lip. His eyes, focused on the crowd, gave nothing away, betraying no hint of the anger or pain he might have been feeling. Security rushed to the scene, but Ethan didn't move. Tourists shouted, some in disbelief, others cheering on Ryan's audacity. He didn't even move, someone in the crowd remarked. "Coward," another voice jeered. But as the video of the incident began to spread online, something unexpected happened. The public's reaction was not what Ryan had anticipated. Instead of condemnation, there was admiration. "Strength isn't always loud," the comments flooded in. "True discipline," they wrote. People were in awe of the quiet resilience Ethan had shown. He stood there, still and silent, while Ryan's impulsive arrogance had made him the fool. Back in the barracks later that day, Captain Brooks approached Ethan, his voice steady but filled with understanding. "He slapped you. You didn't react. You followed protocol perfectly," Brooks said, his words acknowledging what had happened but also hinting at something deeper. He knew Ethan better than anyone else. "But I know you, Ethan. That man's father once fought beside you, didn't he?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, remembering the battlefields, the chaos of war. He remembered how Edward Sinclair, Ryan's father, had been with him when everything had seemed lost. Sinclair had taught him the true meaning of honor, standing still even when everything around you was in turmoil. "If I ever have a son, and he forgets this uniform matters, punch me through time," Ethan recalled Sinclair's words as though they had been spoken just yesterday. But today, as he stood in silence, Ethan realized that it was not just about tradition. It was about something far more important: legacy, discipline, and the strength found in restraint. The slap that had once seemed like an act of disrespect had become the very thing that would define Ethan's character. The world would come to understand the true meaning of strength, not through force, but through stillness, through grace under pressure. And in that moment, Ethan knew that he had done more than simply stand his ground. He had made a statement that would echo far beyond Buckingham Palace. As the video of the slap continued to spread across social media, the world's attention shifted. What had seemed like a moment of disrespect, a young man poking fun at a royal guard, had evolved into something much larger, a public spectacle that sparked intense debate. The image of Ethan Carter, standing motionless with blood trickling from his lip, became a symbol. People across the globe reacted, their voices pouring in through comments, news stories, and viral posts. Some were outraged by Ryan Sinclair's blatant disrespect. How could anyone treat another human being like that? One post read. Others were intrigued by Ethan's reaction, or rather his lack of one. This man showed more strength by doing nothing than anyone could by fighting back, another comment praised. But it wasn't just admiration for Ethan's restraint. It was the realization that the quiet, unspoken strength he embodied was something many had forgotten in today's fast-paced, reactionary world. This incident, which had started as a display of bravado by a wealthy, entitled young man, had turned into a statement about the nature of power, dignity, and restraint. Ethan's stillness had spoken volumes, louder than any words could have. As news outlets across the globe picked up the story, headlines screamed about Ethan's silence in the face of aggression. "Guard bleeds but doesn't blink," one tabloid read. "True strength found in stillness," said another. The viral video became more than just a moment of public humiliation. It was a lesson, one that resonated deeply with people tired of the noise and chaos in their lives. At Sinclair Estate, Ryan sat in front of a massive screen, watching the footage of the slap replay over and over. The sound of his own hand striking Ethan was jarring, a reminder of just how far he'd crossed the line. His father, Edward Sinclair, stood behind him, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Ryan's cocky grin had long since faded, replaced by the heavy weight of regret. He wanted to shrug it off as a joke, something meaningless, a playful challenge, but the gravity of his actions, captured on camera and broadcast for the world to see, began to settle in. Ryan slammed his fist on the table, his anger boiling over. "Why won't he just fight back?" he muttered, frustration evident in his voice. He didn't even flinch, didn't even defend himself. What kind of man does that? Edward's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of years of experience. "Because he has something you don't, son," he said slowly. "Something you may never fully understand: strength. Real strength isn't in how you strike, or in how loudly you make your presence known. It's in how you carry yourself when the world is screaming at you to react. It's in how you remain calm, composed, and steadfast, even when everything around you is trying to make you fall apart." Ryan's mouth went dry. He didn't want to admit it, but his father was right. The video wasn't showing Ethan's weakness. It was showing his strength. Ryan had tried to provoke him, to make him snap. But Ethan had stood there, silent, unwavering. The more Ryan thought about it, the more he realized that Ethan had won. And in that moment, the question wasn't why Ethan hadn't fought back, but why Ryan felt the need to provoke him in the first place. Later that day, as the evening sun cast long shadows over the palace courtyard, Ryan returned, this time in plain clothes. His footsteps echoed softly in the silence of the square as the crowd around him whispered in hushed tones. They recognized him, the young man who had slapped the guard. Some jeered, others watched in curiosity, but the eyes of the tourists were no longer full of mockery. They had seen the strength in Ethan's silence, and now they were curious to see what Ryan would do. Ryan approached the gate, the weight of the moment settling heavily on his shoulders. His hands trembled as he reached for the rope line, his mind racing. He had come here for one purpose: to make things right. Slowly he stepped forward, his voice barely audible. "I came to apologize," he said, his words quiet but sincere. But Ethan stood motionless, as he always did, without acknowledging the apology. There was no response, no shift in his posture, just the quiet authority of someone who had learned the true meaning of strength. Ethan's stillness was his answer, louder than any words could have been. Then, to Ryan's surprise, a gloved hand extended over the rope, holding a sealed envelope. Ryan took it with shaking hands, his heart pounding in his chest. As he sat on a nearby bench and opened the letter, he found a battlefield photo, a medal rubbing, and a letter in neat handwriting. "Ryan, you don't know me, but your father did, and he saved lives beside me. He was brave, foolish sometimes, but honorable. He swore that if you ever lost your way, I should find a way to remind you, not through force, but through example. So I stood still and let you strike. Because some men scream to be seen, others only need to be still to be heard." Ryan's hands began to shake as tears welled up in his eyes. He folded the letter, pressing it to his forehead as he felt the weight of the apology, not just from Ethan, but from himself. Ryan sat there on the bench, still holding the letter in his trembling hands. His mind raced as the words on the page echoed through him, the weight of Ethan's silence, the gravity of the apology he had received. It was all sinking in. For the first time in his life, Ryan realized how shallow his sense of entitlement had been. He had always thought of himself as someone who could do whatever he wanted, that his wealth and status would shield him from consequences. But Ethan's stillness had shattered that illusion, revealing a man who didn't need to shout or fight to prove his strength. As he sat, staring at the letter, Ryan heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up, and there, standing, in front of him was his father, Edward Sinclair, the man who had taught him so much, about strength, about power, about the ways of the world, now stood before him, his face unreadable. Edward's eyes scanned his son for a moment before he spoke, his voice low yet filled with authority. "I saw the video, Ryan," Edward said. His voice was heavy with disappointment. "You've disgraced yourself, and worse, you've disgraced the memory of the men who fought beside me, who fought for something greater than themselves." Ryan looked away, unable to meet his father's gaze. The sting of his father's words hit harder than any slap ever could. He wanted to respond, to defend himself, but the words stuck in his throat. His father had always been a man of few words, but those words carried weight, the kind of weight Ryan was only just beginning to understand. Edward didn't wait for a response. Instead, he placed a firm hand on Ryan's shoulder, the same shoulder he had slapped so many times when Ryan had failed him in the past. This time, though, there was no anger in the touch, only the weight of unspoken words. Edward's next words cut through the silence like a blade. "Your apology wasn't for Ethan," Edward said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was for yourself, and you know it. You've always thought power came from force, from asserting your dominance. But real strength, son, comes from understanding when to stand down. Ethan Carter showed you that today. He didn't need to fight you." His stillness spoke louder than anything you could have said or done. Ryan was silent. His thoughts were clouded, but for the first time in his life he wasn't sure what to believe. The man who had always believed in the power of force and control was now questioning everything he had known. Was his father right? Was Ethan's strength truly in his restraint, in his silence? As the day wore on, the reality of the situation began to set in. The world had watched Ethan stand still, untouched by the mockery, the slap, and the disrespect, and they had respected him for it. They had seen in him a kind of strength that Ryan had never understood until now. Ethan had done what Ryan could never have done. He had stayed true to his principles, held on to his dignity, and never once let the actions of another dictate his response. Ethan's silence had spoken louder than any outburst or retaliation ever could. Back at the Sinclair estate, Ryan retreated to his room, the letter still clutched tightly in his hand. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the battlefield photo and the metal rubbing that had been given to him. The image of Ethan's still face in the square, the quiet strength he had displayed, refused to leave his mind. It was as though Ethan's example had planted a seed in Ryan's heart, one that was slowly beginning to grow. The next day, Ryan knew he had to make things right. He had to find a way to face the man who had shown him what true strength was. He had to apologize, not just for his actions, but for the person he had been, for the person who believed that power came from force, from domination. Ethan had given him the opportunity to see the world in a different light, and Ryan was determined to honor that. He made his way back to Buckingham Palace, alone this time, and as he stood before the gates once more, he felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The crowd had long since dissipated, and the quiet of the square seemed to echo the same silence that had filled Ethan's face the day before. Ryan stepped forward, and as he approached Ethan, who was standing motionless as ever, he felt a deep sense of humility. "I'm sorry," Ryan whispered, his voice breaking through the stillness. Ethan didn't respond, but there was a shift in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey Ryan had just begun. Ethan's silence was no longer a challenge to be conquered, but a lesson to be learned. Ryan took a deep breath and raised his hand to salute him, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time, he understood what it meant to stand still, to hold his ground without a single word. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but Ryan knew it was the right one. And in that moment, he was no longer the arrogant young man who had slapped a guard in front of a crowd. He was someone different now, someone who had learned that true strength wasn't in how loud you could shout, but in how quietly you could stand. The next morning, Ryan Sinclair woke up with a weight on his chest that seemed to press harder with each passing minute. The events from the previous day replayed in his mind like an endless loop. Ethan's stillness, his complete lack of reaction to the slap. It wasn't just surprising, it was unsettling. And the more Ryan thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just Ethan's silence that had shaken him. It was the profound strength behind it. He had expected Ethan to snap back, to react with anger, or to retaliate in some way. But he hadn't. Instead, Ethan had stood his ground, unwavering, like a monument to discipline and restraint. Ryan's own actions, on the other hand, had been fueled by arrogance, pride, and an overwhelming need to be noticed. And in that moment, Ryan couldn't escape the truth. He had been wrong. Sitting in his room at the Sinclair estate, Ryan stared at the battlefield photo Ethan had given him, his mind racing. It was the same photo that had been taken all those years ago in Helmand Province, where Ethan had carried Ryan's father, Edward Sinclair, to safety under fire. The words of the letter echoed in his mind. "I stood still and let you strike. Because some men scream to be seen, others only need to be still to be heard." Ethan's words weren't just a lesson on discipline, they were a reminder of the things Ryan had been blind to, the things his father had tried to teach him, but he had never truly understood. The phone call he had tried to avoid came next. It was his father. Ryan answered reluctantly, not sure what to expect. "Ryan," Edward's voice was low, controlled. "I saw what happened yesterday. I know you think it was all just a joke, but you've made a mistake, not just with your actions, but with your understanding of strength." Ryan's throat tightened. I know, Dad, I messed up." Edward didn't let the pause linger too long. "You've always had the luxury of being able to fight for what you wanted. But that doesn't mean you understand what true strength is. Strength isn't in the loudest voice, the hardest slap, or the most money. It's in how you carry yourself, how you stand your ground when the world tells you to fall. Ethan Carter didn't just show you restraint, he showed you grace." Ryan felt a pang in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation. His father's words hit harder than any physical blow. He had spent his life chasing validation, pushing for attention, doing whatever he could to feel superior. But in that moment, Ryan understood. Ethan had chosen the harder path. He had chosen silence, and in doing so, he had won. The more Ryan thought about it, the more the weight of his actions sank in. The slap had been childish, a vain attempt to provoke a reaction. But Ethan hadn't played into it. He had stood there showing him and the entire world what true strength looked like. Ryan's gaze fell to the letter again. It was a reminder, not just of Ethan's courage, but of his father's words from the battlefield all those years ago. "If I don't make it, raise your hand to my kid if he ever forgets this uniform matters." Edward Sinclair had told Ethan that if his son ever lost his way, Ethan was to find a way to remind him. It was all clear now. The apology Ryan needed to make wasn't just for Ethan. It was for himself, for the person he had been, for the arrogance he had lived with. Ethan's stillness wasn't just a lesson for him. It was a moment of redemption. Ryan had a chance to learn, to grow, to honor the true meaning of strength. And if he didn't seize it now, he might never get another one. Later, that day, Ryan found himself standing before Buckingham Palace once again. This time there was no crowd, no phones, just the quiet, heavy feeling of accountability pressing down on him. Ethan stood at his post, unmoving, as he always did. The gatekeeper of the past, of tradition, of honor. Ryan approached slowly, each step heavy with the weight of what he had to say. "I came to apologize," Ryan said quietly, his voice faltering slightly. Ethan didn't respond, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge him. But Ryan wasn't expecting anything. This wasn't about getting forgiveness. It was about acknowledging the lesson he had learned. Ryan paused, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence between them felt as thick as the walls of the palace, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. And then, just as Ryan was about to leave, a gloved hand extended toward him, holding out a sealed envelope. It was the same one Ethan had given him before. The letter inside was a final message, one that Ryan needed to hear to fully understand Ethan's lesson. Strength isn't in how you strike, but in how you carry what strikes you. Some guards protect gates, others protect something far more fragile. A boy's chance to become a man. Tears welled up in Ryan's eyes as he folded the letter. He understood now. Ethan hadn't just taught him about restraint. He had taught him what it meant to be truly strong, to endure, to stand still, and to rise above. And as Ryan looked up, he saw Ethan standing there, unwavering as a guard should. But today, Ryan felt like he was the one learning the true meaning of that duty. Weeks passed since Ryan had faced Ethan Carter at the gates of Buckingham Palace. The image of Ethan's stillness, the quiet dignity in the face of Ryan's provocation, had not left Ryan's mind. It haunted him, but it also grounded him, changing the way he saw the world. What started as a moment of arrogance had morphed into a personal turning point. Ryan had been given a lesson in humility, a lesson in what true strength was. Now the question lingered. Could he live up to it? Could he transform the man he had been into the man he wanted to become? It wasn't just about the apology anymore. That was just the beginning. Ryan knew the real test lay ahead. He had seen Ethan's strength, had witnessed it firsthand, and now it was time for him to prove that he could rise to the same level of honor and discipline. But there was no clear path, no immediate guide to show him how to make this transformation. The only thing he had was the example Ethan had set, a man who chose to stay still and silent, not for the sake of pride or power, but for something far greater. Back at Sinclair Estate, his father, Edward, had barely acknowledged the shift in Ryan. Edward had seen his son's flaws for years. He had tried to teach him the values of strength, honor, and discipline, but Ryan had always resisted. In a way, his father's lack of acknowledgement was its own form of punishment. The real work, Ryan knew, wasn't going to come from a conversation with Edward. It was going to come from inside himself. It was going to come from putting his newfound understanding into practice. The opportunity came sooner than expected. One afternoon, as Ryan sat in a quiet corner of the estate, a message arrived. A gathering at Buckingham Palace to commemorate the lives of the soldiers who had served, some of them giving everything for the country. It was an event his father had always attended, a silent public reminder of the sacrifices made for freedom. This time, Ryan knew he had to go. He had to be there, not for the ceremony or for the guests, but for himself, for Ethan. The day of the event, Ryan donned a suit, its fabric tight against his body. It felt different this time, though. It wasn't about how well it fit or how good he looked. It was about showing up as someone who had changed, someone who had made peace with his past. He stood tall at Buckingham Palace, walking across the courtyard with purpose. The crowd had gathered, their faces a blur as he made his way to the front. At the memorial, the speakers spoke of sacrifice and bravery. But as Ryan listened, his mind wandered. He thought of Ethan, the man who had taught him the lesson he hadn't even known he needed. The man who, despite everything Ryan had done to provoke him, had chosen silence. He hadn't struck back. He hadn't fought in the way Ryan had expected. And yet Ethan had won, not with fists or words, but with a quiet, unwavering strength. After the ceremony, Ryan saw Ethan once more. He was standing at his usual post, just as motionless as the first time Ryan had seen him. This time, however, Ryan didn't feel the urge to mock, to provoke, or to demand attention. Instead, he felt something entirely different. Respect. True respect. The kind that didn't need to be loud, didn't need to be acknowledged. It was the kind of respect that Ethan had earned through his actions, through his restraint. Ryan approached Ethan slowly, but this time there were no words of defiance, no challenges. There was only a quiet understanding between them. Ethan's eyes met Ryan's, but he didn't speak. Ryan, however, felt the weight of his own transformation. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a man who had learned the value of restraint, who had seen what it meant to protect something far more fragile than power or pride, the honor of standing firm when everything else tried to pull you down. "I get it now," Ryan said quietly, his voice low but firm. Ethan remained motionless, his face still, but Ryan saw the smallest nod, just enough to acknowledge the words, to acknowledge the change. There was no need for further explanation. The lesson had been learned. It was done. Ryan had taken the first step toward becoming the man Ethan had taught him to be. The plaque honoring Ethan's discipline stood in the square, a testament to his strength, his quiet strength. As tourists passed by, many of them would stop and read the inscription beneath the plaque, which read, "He stood still so others could rise." And as Ryan walked away from the palace that day, he knew this wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. He had learned the true meaning of strength, not in how loud you could make yourself heard, but in how deeply you could stand in silence when everything around you demanded noise. He wasn't just protecting a gate anymore. He was protecting something far more valuable, the honor of knowing what it means to rise when you've been struck down. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's story. What do you think about Ethan's unwavering strength and the powerful lesson he taught Ryan? Do you believe true strength lies in silence and restraint, or do you think there's another way to show power? We're curious to know how this story made you feel. Did it change the way you think about discipline and personal growth? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to engage with you and hear how you interpret Ethan's actions and Ryan's transformation. Do you agree with the lesson of standing firm without reacting? Or do you think Ryan should have defended himself differently? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our next story. We're bringing you more thought-provoking narratives that will leave you questioning what it really means to show strength, resilience, and honor. Your insights matter to us, so please join the conversation and tell us what this story means to you. We look forward to hearing from you and continuing this journey together. Let's keep the discussion going.